The call came at 2:47 in the morning, and I knew before I even picked up that something had gone wrong with my brother. I'd had that feeling before, twice in Vietnam, once when his first wife left him, and now again at 71 years old, standing in my kitchen in Tucson with the tile cold under my bare feet, staring at his name on my phone screen like I could will it to say something different. Norm. His voice was barely above a whisper. Lenny. I said his name the way our mother used to. Soft, like a question. Where are you? He told me. Not a hospital, not a friend's house. A crisis stabilization unit on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. He'd been there 3 days. 3 days, and nobody had called me. Who admitted you? I asked. Silence. Leonard. Darlene signed the paperwork. Darlene. His daughter. My niece. 34 years old, married 4 years to a man named Fletcher, who I had never liked and never pretended to otherwise. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stood there in my kitchen with the refrigerator humming and the clock on the microwave reading 2:48, and I thought about my brother's face the last time I'd seen him at Thanksgiving. How he'd lost weight. How he'd laughed a little too quickly at Fletcher's jokes. How he'd looked at me once across the dinner table with something in his eyes I hadn't wanted to read. Are you hurt? I asked. Another silence. Longer this time. I fell, he said, down the porch steps. I'd been a retired county sheriff for 9 years. I know what people sound like when they're lying to protect someone else. I'll be there in 2 days, I said. Norm, you don't have to. 2 days, Lenny. I hung up and started packing. My brother and I are identical twins. People have been confusing us our whole lives. Same 6-foot frame. Same gray now where there used to be brown. Same jaw our father gave us that our mother called stubborn and everyone else called worse. The difference, if you know us, is in how we carry ourselves. Lenny is soft. He's a retired high school principal, a gardener, a man who cries at nature documentaries and apologizes to strangers who bump into him. I spent 31 years in law enforcement and before that 2 tours overseas. I don't cry at much. I don't apologize for things that aren't my fault. We balance each other out. Always have. Lenny's wife, Carol, passed 6 years ago from pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal. He never really recovered from it, and I think that's when Darlene and Fletcher started to see opportunity where there used to be just a family. I drove straight through from Tucson with 1 stop in Albuquerque for gas and bad coffee. When I got to Columbus, I didn't go to the crisis unit first. I went to Lenny's house. I had a key. I'd had one for 20 years. What I found when I walked through the front door stopped me cold. Carol's garden was dead. The whole backyard she'd spent 15 years building, the raised beds, the climbing roses on the trellis, the small Japanese maple she planted the year Darlene was born, all of it dead or overrun with weeds. The inside of the house was worse. Not dirty exactly, more like stripped. The good furniture was gone. The oak dining set Carol had inherited from her mother. The rollback desk Lenny had bought at an estate sale and refinished himself one summer. Gone. Replaced with cheap stuff that didn't fit the rooms. I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet where Lenny had always kept his medications. He had a heart condition. Nothing immediately dangerous, but he took a daily blood thinner and a beta blocker that kept things regulated. His cardiologist in Columbus was Dr. Nice, Patricia Hollenbeck, who I'd spoken to once at Carol's funeral. Good doctor. Clear communicator. The cabinet was empty. I called Dr. Hollenbeck's office when they opened. I told the nurse I was Leonard's brother calling on his behalf. and asked when his last prescription had been filled. She couldn't tell me specifics without authorization, but she said, carefully, the way medical people speak carefully, that they'd had difficulty reaching him and that there was a flag on his account indicating his prescription management had been transferred to a family representative. Family representative. I thanked her and hung up. I drove to the crisis unit and signed in as Leonard Beaumont's emergency contact because I was. I'd been listed as his emergency contact since Carol died, and we both updated our paperwork. Whoever had admitted him hadn't mentioned that, or checked. When they brought him into the family meeting room, I had to work very hard to keep my face neutral. His left eye was yellowed at the outer corner. Old bruising, fading but still visible. He had a bandage on his forearm he tried to keep turned away from me. He walked with a slight hitch that wasn't there at Thanksgiving. He sat down across from me and tried to smile. "You look good," he said. "You look like you fell down some stairs," I said. He looked at the table. I reached across and put my hand over his. "Lenny, look at me." He looked up. "Who did this to you?" He was quiet for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere down the hall someone laughed, and it echoed weirdly. "Fletcher has a temper," he said finally. "It's not. Darlene doesn't know how bad it gets. She's not Darwin." "Does she know about the medications?" Something shifted in his face. "Quick, like a curtain moving. He controls the prescriptions," I said. "Doesn't he?" It was supposed to simplify things. After I had the small episode last year, Darlene thought it would be easier if Lenny. I kept my voice even. He withholds them. My brother closed his eyes. I sat there and I let the reality of what had been happening in that house settle over me the way cold water settles. Slow and thorough. Fletcher Crane was 40 years old. He'd married Darlene 4 years ago in a ceremony Lenny had paid for entirely. He'd moved into Lenny's house 18 months later, temporarily, because of a job transition that never seemed to transition anywhere. He'd gotten himself added to Lenny's bank account as a joint holder by convincing Lenny it would make bill paying easier. He'd isolated my brother from most of his friends by being difficult and critical whenever they visited until they stopped visiting, and he'd transferred prescription management to himself as caregiver. Using a limited medical power of attorney he'd had Lenny sign during the disoriented week after Lenny's minor cardiac event last spring. It was neat, as far as these things go. Controlled and incremental, the kind of thing that's hard to see when you're inside it. I saw it clearly. I asked Lenny one more question before I left that day. "Does Fletcher know what I look like?" Lenny frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, has he spent enough time around me to tell us apart?" My brother stared at me. Then, slowly, understanding crossed his face. "Norm, we did it for 3 weeks in 1974 when you didn't want to take finals. We were 19. The fundamentals haven't changed. It took me 4 days to get everything in order. I called a lawyer I knew from my years in the department, a woman named Judith Sallow, who specialized in elder financial abuse and didn't charge family members of law enforcement for initial consultations. I told her what I knew. She told me what I needed to document. I bought a small digital recorder that fit in a shirt pocket. I reviewed the Ohio statutes on elder abuse, financial exploitation, and unauthorized medical decision-making. Then I called Lenny and told him the plan. He argued for 20 minutes. He said Fletcher would figure it out. He said it was too risky. He said Darlene would be devastated. I said, "Darlene's father is in a crisis facility with old bruises on his face and someone else controlling his heart medication. I think we're past worrying about devastated." He went quiet. 2 weeks, I said. Maybe less. I just need access to the house and documentation of what's happening. Another long pause. The scar, he said finally, on my knee, from the motorcycle. I know about the scar. He's seen it. He'll look. I'll wear long pants. Lenny exhaled. He drinks, he said, at night, after Darlene goes to sleep. He drinks and he gets mean. That's when it happens. Good, I said. That's useful. I moved in on a Thursday. The story we arranged was that Lenny was being discharged on a modified basis, recommended to return home with reduced stress and minimal conflict. The crisis unit social worker, a young man named Kevin who seemed to genuinely care about his patients, had already documented concerns about Lenny's home environment in the intake notes. He couldn't make accusations, but he documented. Darlene picked me up from the unit. She hugged me carefully, the way people hug someone they think might break. I hugged her back and noticed she'd lost weight too, and had a look behind her eyes that I recognized from years of interviewing people in difficult marriages. Not fear, exactly, more like the constant low-grade work of managing someone else's moods. Fletcher was waiting in the living room when we got home. He stood up when I came in and I watched his face run through its assessment. He was a big man, not as tall as me but broader, soft in the middle now, with small eyes that moved quickly and a smile that engaged only the bottom half of his face. "Leonard," he said, and his voice had that particular warmth people use when they've decided the person in front of them is not a threat. "Good to have you home." "Thank you," I said quietly. Lenny's register, softer than mine. "The doctor says rest," Fletcher said. "So we're going to make sure you rest." The way he said it didn't sound like care. It sounded like a boundary. I looked around the living room and let myself look confused, the way a man might look after a week in a psychiatric facility. "Is the Barcelona still in the bedroom?" "Sold it," Fletcher said. "Got in the way." "Carol loved that chair," I said. "Carol's gone," he said. Simple, flat, final. I nodded slowly and went to find my room. The first 3 days I watched. That's the most important thing they teach you at investigative work. Before you do anything, before you say anything, you watch. You map the territory. You learn the rhythms. Fletcher worked from home, allegedly in real estate, though I never saw him on a call that lasted more than 5 minutes or produce any paperwork that looked like actual transactions. He controlled the house the way a certain kind of man controls things, through small humiliations designed to establish the hierarchy without ever crossing into anything that would be obvious to a third party. He spoke to Darlene like she was slightly stupid. He spoke to me like I was an inconvenience. He was generously tolerating. He monitored the refrigerator and made pointed comments when I ate something he considered excessive. When Darlene's friend Wanda called and they talked for 40 minutes, Fletcher sat in the kitchen the entire time, audibly present, until Darlene cut the call short. On the third night, I saw the medications. He kept them in a lockbox in the bedroom closet, a small steel box with a combination. He brought my supposed doses each morning and evening himself, standing in the doorway while I took them, watching me swallow. He'd set this up before Lenny came home from the unit. He'd arranged with a mail-order pharmacy to ship directly to him as the listed caregiver, and the prescription was under his account login. Lenny had no independent access. I took the pills he gave me. I'd confirmed with Lenny they were the correct medications, and I'd called Dr. Hollenbeck's office from my personal phone to verify the dosages were accurate. Fletcher was controlling access, but he wasn't poisoning. That distinction mattered legally. What he was doing was still a crime in Ohio. Section 2903.13, reckless endangerment, and the financial exploitation statutes. I was building the record. On the fourth evening, I did something intentional. I sat at the kitchen table after dinner and said mildly, "I was thinking I'd like to call Raymond Briggs tomorrow." Haven't talked to him since the hospital. Raymond Briggs was one of Lenny's oldest friends. Fletcher had, over 2 years, made things so uncomfortable that Raymond had essentially stopped coming around. Fletcher looked up from his phone. "Raymond's busy. He mentioned it to me last week." He hadn't spoken to Raymond. He couldn't have. Raymond didn't have Fletcher's number, and I knew this because I was, in fact, Raymond's friend, too, and I'd already texted him from the parking lot of a CVS 3 blocks away. "I'd still like to call," I said pleasantly. Fletcher set down his phone. "Leonard." The warmth was gone now, replaced by something careful and cold. "You're supposed to be recovering. Stress isn't good for your heart." He let that land. I looked at him for a moment. "You're right," I said. "I'll rest." He nodded, satisfied, and picked up his phone again. I stood, shuffled toward the hallway, and, once I was around the corner and out of his sight line, clicked off the recorder in my pocket. Then I stood very still for a moment and breathed, the way I used to breathe before making an arrest. Slow, deliberate. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Patience. That's what this required. The moment I'd been waiting for came on day 9. Darlene had driven to her friend Wanda's house for a birthday dinner. Fletcher had drunk most of a bottle of bourbon by 9 o'clock. I knew because I could hear the ice in his blast from the living room, and the cadence of the television changed when he drank. He started flipping channels faster, then stopped on things he watched with too much intensity, then started talking at the screen. I was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of water when he came in. He looked at me the way drunk men look at people they've decided they don't have to be careful around. "You know what your problem is," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tell me," I said. "You think this house is still yours?" He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me, and I could smell the bourbon from where I was. "You signed half of it to Darlene 2 years ago. You remember that?" I did remember because Lenny had told me. He'd signed under pressure during a period of grief and confusion, and what he now understood had been deliberate manipulation. "I remember," I said. "So you understand the situation." He leaned back. "I don't need to be unkind about it. But you need to understand, Darlene and I have plans for this house. Good plans. And those plans work better when—" he gestured vaguely at me, "when things are simplified." "Simplified," I repeated. "I've been patient," he said. "More patient than a lot of men would be." "I appreciate that," I said. He looked at me with the small-eyed assessment again, and I think for a moment he was looking for something, some reaction, some flinch, some trembling in the lip of an old man being told his home wasn't his anymore. I kept my face soft and blank, and somewhere behind it I was running calculations. I had enough on tape. I'd had enough since day 6, honestly. The medication control was the clearest violation, and I'd photographed the lockbox, documented the pharmacy account, recorded 3 separate conversations in which Fletcher had made implicit threats about medication access contingent on Lenny's compliance. But I wanted this one too. "What kind of plans?" I asked. He told me. 40 minutes of bourbon loose detail about selling the house, the timeline, what Darlene's half would net at current Columbus market prices, his opinion on what my presence was doing to that timeline, and his view, stated with the casual confidence of someone who thinks they're untouchable, that if I cooperated, things would go smoothly, and if I didn't, I'd find that his access to my prescriptions could become unpredictable. There it was. I nodded slowly when he finished. "I'll think about what you've said," I told him. He seemed satisfied. He took his bourbon back to the living room. I went to my room and called Judith Sallow. She'd already been in contact with the Columbus PD Elder Abuse Unit. the County Adult Protective Services Office, and Dr. Dalt Hollenbeck, who had agreed to provide a written statement about the unauthorized transfer of prescription management and its medical implications for a patient with Lenny's cardiac history. We were ready. I made one more call. To Lenny. Thursday, I told him. Be here. Fletcher came home Thursday afternoon after whatever he'd been doing with his mornings to find two Columbus PD detectives in the living room. He found Judith Sallow at the dining table with a banker's box of documentation. He found Raymond Briggs sitting in the armchair by the window because Raymond was Lenny's oldest friend and he deserved to be there. And he found two identical old men standing in the entry hall. It took him a moment. I watched the calculation run across his face, the way his eyes went from me to Lenny and back again, trying to find the tell, the difference, the proof of which was which. "What is this?" he said. It came out flat, not quite a question. "This," I said, "is what happens when you confuse a man's gentleness for weakness." I introduced myself properly. I told him my name, my former title, and my current purpose. I told him the recording had been running since day 4. I told him the financial exploitation documentation covered 26 months of account activity. I told him that Dr. Hollenbeck's statement regarding the prescription control had been characterized by the Adult Protective Services investigator as one of the clearest cases of medical coercion she'd seen in her 12 years in the unit. Fletcher looked at Darlene. Darlene was standing at the edge of the kitchen doorway. She'd been there for the last part of it. Her face was the most complicated thing in the room. "I didn't know about the medication," she said. Her voice was very small. "I didn't know it was, I thought it was just easier." Fletcher started to say something. "Don't," she said, quietly but in a voice I recognized as a woman who had just decided something permanent. The detectives were very professional about it. There wasn't a lot of drama, despite what you might expect. Handcuffs, paperwork, the reading of rights in the ordinary tone of people who have done this many times. Fletcher didn't say much. He was the kind of man who knew when a performance was over. After they took him out, the house was very quiet. Lemmy sat down at the kitchen table. The table that was still there had always been there, oak and solid as the day Carol picked it out. Raymond sat across from him. Judith Sallow gathered her things efficiently and said she'd be in touch about the civil recovery proceedings regarding the account funds. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, not quite in either room. Darlene was at the sink with her back to me. Her shoulders were very still. I knew something was wrong," she said. She wasn't talking to anyone in particular. I knew for a long time. "I know," I said. "I just thought if I kept things calm, kept him." She stopped. "I thought I was protecting Dad." I walked over and stood beside her. We looked out the window at Carol's garden. The dead raised beds. The overgrown trellis. "The maple's still alive," I said. She looked. It was true. Small and stressed and in need of attention, but alive at the roots. She started to cry the way exhausted people cry. Not dramatically, just the release of something that had been held too long. I put my hand on her shoulder and left it there. Fletcher was charged with elder financial exploitation under Ohio Revised Code 2913.02, reckless endangerment and coercive control. The civil proceedings recovered $61,000 from joint account transfers that Judith's forensic accountant traced to accounts in Fletcher's name. The medical power of attorney he'd had Lenny sign was declared invalid by a probate court judge, who, according to Judith, used the words textbook manipulation in her written ruling. Then he moved his prescriptions back to Dr. Hollenbeck's direct management. He enrolled in a garden rehabilitation program through the Columbus Parks Department. He called me every Sunday at noon. Darlene filed for divorce 3 weeks after the arrest. She stayed in the house, which was still half hers, and spent her first free weekend pulling weeds out of her mother's raised beds. She called me the following Monday and said the Japanese maple had new growth at the tips of the branches. I drove back to Tucson on a clear October morning with the windows down and the radio on. I'm not a man who came from a gentle place. I've seen what people do to each other, and I've spent most of my adult life dealing with the aftermath of it. I don't have many illusions left about human nature, but here's what I know about my brother. He spent 40 years building something good. He taught high school English for 4 decades. He grew a garden with the woman he loved. He raised a daughter who was, underneath everything Fletcher had buried her under, still capable of standing in a dead garden and seeing what was still alive in it. Some things you don't let go without a fight. My brother needed someone to fight, and I was always the one built for it. That's what brothers are for.